Very good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome to a new edition of our Research Futures webinar. My name is Leila Shukroon. I'm Professor of International Law and Director of the University of Portsmouth Thematic Initiative in Democratic Citizenship. Today, we are absolutely delighted to welcome our colleague from Delhi and also former student of the University of Portsmouth, Dr. Sutirtha Sahariah, who is today heading the communication, and he's also the Senior Vice President at Sulabh International Social Services. Well, you might not have heard about Sulabh, but it's a fantastic and extraordinarily large organization in India, which is in particular, and Suti is going to tell you more, very much involved in water issues, waste management, and a number of very important social issues. Suti's presentation is based on years of journalism and research on issues of gender, work, and human trafficking. And we are going to address together the concepts of resilience and dignity for a number of women Suti's been working with. Although I have to tell you that Suti's work is going to be published very soon in the format of a book with Routledge. So we're very much looking forward to that, and certainly we'll give you the references to this book at the end of the conversation. So without further ado, Suti, the floor is yours.
Well, Lala, thank you for this warm introduction. Good evening to everyone from Delhi. Well, as Lala just mentioned, I work here for an international NGO called Sulabh International, which was set up in 1970. And the organization was in the sanitation sector. It started, it's a Gandhian organization, and the whole idea of a Sulabh sanitation movement was to use toilet or sanitation for the emancipation of women. So this year, the organization has completed 50 years, and broadly, we work across areas like sanitation, gender, water, and waste management. Coming back to the topic today, even before I start, Lala have just mentioned that I worked as a journalist in the past. I worked for a number of international broadcasters and publications like The Guardian, the BBC, the Dutch Public Radio and Television. So while I was working as a journalist, the key issues that I covered across South Asia was human trafficking, gender violence, and development across the region. And my experiences of covering women's issues gave me an in-depth understanding and appreciation of the enormous challenges that women face, and also their contribution to the society at various levels. So even before I begin today, I would like to pay my utmost respect to those incredible women, and with the contribution, I would not be making this presentation today. So this presentation is a story of their perseverance and their determination to win in life. And talking about resilience today, just a second. So just last week across the Eastern India and Nepal, we celebrated a very important festival. It's an annual festival called Durga Puja. And as you can see in the image, Goddess Durga is a symbol of war, strength, and protection. And she is known to be combating evils and demonic forces that threatens peace and prosperity. You can see here that she is battling a demon here. And she's a power of, a symbol of women's power. And especially in Nepal and Eastern India, this festival is really, really significant. But at the time of COVID-19, we have been talking a lot about how the virus or the pandemic has disproportionately impacted the lives of poor women who work in the informal sector as domestic workers, women who work in the sex and entertainment industry. So this image that you see in front of you is an image from one of the venues in Calcutta where they depicted the plight of migrant women. Many of these women were employed in cities, and after the pandemic and the subsequent lockdown, they became jobless, and many of them walked thousands of miles homes. So in the face of this oppression, exploitation, and loss of job, these women have been fighters, and they have been able to demonstrate a great degree of resilience. So that is essentially what I'm going to talk about today: how women build resilience against exploitation and violence. And just to give you a bit of a background about this research, so the research that I'm going to talk about was actually a DFI decommissioned study, and University of Portsmouth under Professor Tamsin Bradley was the academic lead. So the DFID Commission study wanted to explore how approaches to women's economic empowerment can tackle violence at the same time. And during the course of this study, and as a part of my PhD, I explored the pathways of how women build resilience to violence. And the group that I studied are the women who are kind of employed in the informal entertainment sector or the sex industry in Nepal. And most of them work in two tourist destinations, the Kathmandu, the capital, and Thamel. This is one of the growing sectors in the sense that in South Asia and Southeast Asia, the entertainment sector, which is linked to the hospitality and tourism, it makes up to 3 to 4% of the GDP for some countries like Thailand and Indonesia, and it's growing rapidly even in India. And just to give an idea of the background, because my focus of this presentation is mainly on India and Nepal, we talk about women's labor force participation. India, which is one of the fastest growing economies in the world, but it also has one of the lowest women labor force participation. It is somewhere around 23%, but after the pandemic, it's going to be a bit lower than this. Nepal, however, sees a very high percentage of women working in the unorganized sector. This is primarily because Nepal also exports labor mainly across Middle East and other countries. So the feminization of agriculture, a lot of women are kind of engaged in agriculture. But in both the countries, women are overrepresented in sectors such as domestic work, construction work, beauty and wellness industry, which is also the entertainment industry, and sex work. And following the pandemic and the lockdown, these sectors have seen massive losses of livelihood. Coming to the research framework, the examples that I'm going to give you today is based on in-depth qualitative study of 30 women who are presently employed in the sex and entertainment industry in Kathmandu, and also based on 2 focus group studies consisting of 7 women each. While studying this group of women, it was important to find out what are the causes or what influences their decision to join this very vulnerable and exploitative sector. So the study was divided into 2 parts. One was to really understand what happened just before the point they joined this sector. So early life and migration, why actually they migrated to the city? Did they face any kind of violence as they were growing up? So a lot of questions were around that. Also about after joining the sector, and one of the biggest reasons why they joined the sector is to earn an income. So a lot of questions were around how does income change the status quo? Do they have a decision-making power? Do they have control over the income? Questions are also asked around intersectional features. For example, the unregulated market, sex industry or otherwise, there's a high degree of violence. How do women cope with violence? How do they build a resilience? And coming back to the type of jobs they do, the questions they're also asked, they were asked to explain a bit about the nature of the jobs, which I'll be pointing out in a moment, and about the aspirations of their future. Most of these women are single women. They have had a lot of violence in their lives, so they must have some kind of hope for the future. What is that? 2 factors that came out largely while investigating this group of women. Normally, there is an assumption that most women who join the informal entertainment industry, the sex industry, they join because of poverty or because of factors like human trafficking. But the evidence that emerged from this study showed otherwise. Internal conflict, and this kind of is applicable anywhere else in the world. And Nepal kind of saw a big, it's not a civil war, but kind of civil war, a Maoist insurgent struggle between 1996 and 2006. So among the significant findings that emerged from the interviews conducted with women who work in this sector is that the 10-year-long Maoist conflict between 1996 to 2006, led by the Maoist forces known as the People's Liberation Army against government forces, had devastating consequences on their early lives. 1/3 of the women that are interviewed were directly affected by the conflict. 6 women confirmed that they were abducted, sexually abused, raped, and were used as child soldiers during the conflict. Others who had migrated when they were very young said that the conflict was the main cause for them to move to a city because school children were regularly abducted by the People Liberation Army and were forced to join ranks in their forces. And recruited girls were used as scouts, spies, porters, cooks, and also inducted in the cultural troops. The cultural troops means people who propagate the Maoist ideology through music and culture. The other factors that were responsible for driving women to these sectors are pretty well known. Child marriage. Now all the participants I've interviewed married below the age of 18. None of them are educated. Notions of honor, caste system, abusive husbands, because the husbands are also pretty young when they migrate to city. They either go abroad or get into a relationship with someone else, and they abandon their wives. And most of them are single mothers. They have children. Alcohol being the other problem because they become very, very abusive. In this slide, I just want to give an impression of what it was meant for a few women, what happened to them when they joined the PLA. You can see, this is a quote from one of the participants, and she was abducted because her brother was in the army, and she was made to kill a lot of people. And she said once during the clash with the army, she had to lie down on the ground. A bullet had hit her leg. She was bleeding, and all she got was a painkiller. And as a part of training, she was made to lie on the ground. They would then chop off a branch from a tree, which would fall on her stomach. And they were told that this would help build strength, and they can be a good fighter. Another participant said that she was taken to the jungle. She was tortured, stoned, beaten badly, and made to do a lot of work. And she was also a mother. So when the baby cried, they would put mud in her stomach, and they would keep the baby in the cave. And she fainted several times, and they used to give her food 2-3 days. And she was sexually abused. She was hanged to a tree and raped. And then she managed to flee. The unfortunate thing is that when the peace process was signed between the government and the Maoist forces, these women were forgotten. And they were not even accepted by their families. And even today, the peace process or the reconciliation process, whatever mechanisms have been set up by Nepal, these women have not been compensated and they have not received any justice. But you can see the level of trauma these women have faced. And the only options for them was to kind of go and join the sex industry, because that is the only place they could have earned some kind of money. For the other women, why do they actually join the industry? Here are examples, case studies of 3 women. For example, one participant, who is now age 41, she says that her husband was very violent and later abandoned her. And other jobs, which is very important. Now, we talk a lot about other jobs in informal sector, but those jobs, these women the participants have repeatedly mentioned that those jobs are equally exploitative. So she here says that other jobs are not profitable, and she used to cycle 20 kilometers to sell vegetables. But her business never picked up. Children were starving and they could not go to school. And she says that I was struggling to make ends meet. And a friend told her about this sex work, and purely out of desperation, she joined the industry and worked as a contract sex worker because she could not have let her children starve. And after a year, she was able to save enough money and set up her own business. And now she earns around 15,000 rupees. Participant 2 says that she worked as a domestic maid, working from 5 a.m. to 12 p.m., but she was never paid money. But when they came to know that she's from a lower caste, she was simply fired. But then she was young and had an impressionable mind. And she came across someone who told her about this industry where she could make a lot of money. And then she joined a spa center, really. And first few days, she says that first few days she was asked to do cleaning work. And one day they asked her to massage a customer. And then they told her that if she wanted to earn more money, she has to go beyond that, means get involved with sex work. And another participant makes it very clear that she needed money to run the house and educate her daughter. She was not educated, and to live a decent life in a city like Kathmandu, you need 15 to 20,000 rupees. And on top of that, she says that there is domestic violence, so women must fend for themselves and must take up jobs for survival. She personally worked as domestic maid and in the construction sites, but those jobs were not and they did not pay much. And after her childbirth, she could not go back and work as a laborer. So she kind of joined a massage parlor. And only after joining this sector, she realized that she was expected to do something else. But once they joined the sector, there is some kind of benefit, not in benefit, there's some kind of empowerment that these women experience. For example, you can see here that one woman says that, income is everything. And today, if she's alive and if children are going to school because she's earning an income, and she says that she has suffered when there was no income and she had no voice earlier. And now she's independent and she's a confident person. And she says that if you have no income, even your children don't become yours. And today, if her child desires to have a fruit, she's in a position to buy that for him. Another participant says that because of the income that she earns to this sector, she feels very confident and she feels that she can win in life under any capacity. Her daughter does not know about her work, but one day she said she would not hesitate if asked because she's very proud to be standing on her own feet. And participant said that income has made her very confident, and had she not worked, her family would have married her off. This particular participant, though she is a sex worker, she also does a bit of advocacy work, teaching women who are engaged in this sector about condom use. And she says that she's thankful to her parents for letting her do what she wanted. In this particular slide, I just want to give an example that although these women might be employed in this very exploitative sector, the other jobs which are available in the market for women who are not skilled and not educated are equally exploitative. For example, one sex worker who now, because of her age, now sells vegetables, says that while selling vegetables, she faces a lot of harassment from the police. They kind of extort money from her, which is also true for women who work in the sex and entertainment. Sometimes they become violent and throw away the vegetables as you're not allowed to sell them on the road. And she was also taken into custody, and she goes on to say that there's not much difference, but violence is of different kind. Not much difference between the violence in the sex and entertainment industry and the violence for normal women. She says that the authorities abused us, and was working in the sex industry, they would often tell her that, why don't you do other jobs? And while selling vegetables, the municipality and the police also kind of harasses them. And it is not safe for a vegetable vendor if you're a woman, because when it rains, the men kind of look at them because they get wet and they cannot stay long, after dark. And sometimes the vegetables rot because of rain and the losses suffer. And so the marketplaces are not really safe for women either. I mean, there's no provision to make the marketplaces safer. There's no designated place where women can, sell their stuff. And when asked if the levels of violence has increased for her or any other women at her place, she says that a lot depends on the women. But in the entertainment industry, it is still the same. It never changes. Violence will always be there. It is about improving the safety of workplace, which hasn't happened, which is a very important statement really coming from someone who has faced a lot of violence. Now, when you talk about income, often we talk about agency and empowerment, but there are four the agency and empowerment is also linked with 4 dimensions of power, which is power over, like when you have control over personal decisions, and power 2, autonomy over household decisions. There is also power with, power that you acquire when you women come, when they collectively, when they come together, and power from, like enhancing individuals' dignity and awareness. What I found from this study is that, of course, when women join this sector, it's a conscious decision. It's a strategic decision because it's a question of survival. So one thing, when they were married, one thing that they had in their life, they had no voice, they had no agency, because they have always been in a very exploitative situation right from the time they were growing up in adolescence or even as a child. But you can see here, the moment they start earning income, and I would like to say, repeat that they're all single mothers and they all want a great future for their children. They have, because of the money they have earned, they have some kind of autonomy over their personal decisions. For the first time in their life, they are able to take decisions for themselves and how to spend the money and how they are going to run the house. So immediately, though they might be working in a very vulnerable sector, they experience 2 kinds of powers here, power over and power to. But I have been mentioning a lot about violence and the nature of work they have to do. And here is an account of a couple of women. They said that, the way these women have to work, or if you're working in a bar, so they are paid commission based on the number of drinks that the customer purchases. So it's their job to ensure that the customer is constantly buying alcohol, and that is how they make money. And so, for example, one participant said, "Let me tell you, our profession, there is all sorts of physical harassment." The other problem is that we can't work without fear of police. Also, as a woman, I face a lot of harassment while traveling in a bus. There is some sort of daily harassment, like someone trying to pinch me or touch me. I do resist, but what else can you do? Police helps women who are empowered and powerful. They only harass women who are working in this sector. There's also an uncertainty about payment, and we are forced to drink alcohol. And if you do not drink, we are treated badly. Men humiliate them, and they call them by bad names, and men who are in power, army men, many politicians, the police, they feel that they can do whatever they want. Another participant said that I faced a lot of violence, physical, sexual, and verbal. A big percentage of customers look for sex, part of the package. Since prostitution is illegal in Nepal, it is provided in massage parlors, and many men who are from police come in plain clothes and take my services, but later they refuse to pay, saying that they are policemen. And many women also operate from open space, and police harassment is a major problem. If we do not listen to them, they even take us into custody. Just to point out here, the massage parlor is also is one of the fastest and rapidly growing sector, even in India, in big cities now. It has come up everywhere, and it employs hundreds and thousands of women from various parts of the subcontinent. But coming back, how do these women actually build resilience to this level of violence? Once you're in this sector, obviously you might be earning money, but given the high level of violence, how do you actually cope? How do you create the coping mechanisms? While doing this study, I came across 4 local NGOs which are actually set up by women who initially worked in this sector, but now they have gone on to help other women, who are working in this sector. So the women's collectives play a significant role. I'm going to give an example of one NGO, which is called Raksha Nepal, and it's run by a lady called Menuka Thapa, who earlier used to work in this sector. And she set up this credit and savings schemes because most of these women do not have citizenship. They never had papers in their life because the husband abandoned them, and the families have abandoned them, and so they do not have access to financial mechanisms. So they have credit and savings schemes. Union, the formal membership, which is registered on the Labor Ministry, it brings a lot of women together, and that gives them a collective voice. This is a quote from the chairperson of Raksha Nepal, the NGO that I just mentioned. And she said that in 2004, she realized that women are not saving enough. So I came up with the idea to pool savings because if you could pool your money, you could have some kind of saving. She said that I cannot help everyone, but everyone can help someone. The women frequently worried about their children's future. I told them that if they save 50 rupees a day, they can gradually save enough to do something in a few years, and that can be used to pay for children's education. We took 10 rupees from every woman to start with, and in 4 years it became a significant amount, and that served as a collateral to open credit and savings scheme. And now these schemes have, over 8 to 10,000 women, and when I spoke to them, it's actually working. We are, able to save, and some of the women, they have been able to come out of this profession, once because of old age, and they've been able to set up micro businesses. Again, coming back to resilience, I have used a framework while doing this study. It's called Ferguson and Zimmerman's 2005. It essentially says that, resilience model, it kind of stresses on the importance of ecological context, that external factors like peer networks may help women to respond more effectively to social, health, and occupational risks. So the support system, the 4 NGOs that I came across, that I mapped while doing this study, they were actually providing mentoring relationships, there was some kind of trust between the women, bringing all these women together. So they were providing a kind of a protective mechanism, and they're promoting resilience in the face of neglect, abuse, low socioeconomic status, and other challenges. And how it is manifested, I just give an example. For example, here is an account of 2 women. They came in contact with NGO Raksha Nepal, and one of the participants, she says that she took vocational trainings and learned stitching and tailoring for 9 months. And she was able to access loans, and then she was able to set up her own business. And now she's confident enough, and she feels that she's very confident, and she can provide for her daughter's education. And another participant here says that, she was able to learn the local language, and she participated in leadership program, which made her feel a bit empowered. The credit and savings schemes was really helpful for her because she was able to buy a piece of land, and she was able to put her daughter in the shelter home run by these NGOs. And she has learned not to be silent and demand her rights, which is very significant. And I help other women who are in trouble and teach them about how to protect themselves from health risk. And also, she tells them about using condoms. So talking about resilience, what we found was, because these women have had a lot of trauma in their life, they have certain kind of strength within them, they have already have some kind of coping mechanisms, also a bit of self-confidence and determination, but that needs to be manifested or accentuated. So the peer networks, and they provide counseling, skill development training. They also create a community. And when women come and gather here, their confidence kind of increases, and there is definitely an outcome of this. So this is basically a model which I proposed. For example, this is the entry-level perception, women are, they may have low self-esteem here because they have had a lot of violence in their lives. And they come, power within is when they come in contact with women's collectives. So these NGOs, the peer networks, they provide 4 kinds of services, psychosocial counseling, motivation, self-esteem, awareness about their rights, and skill development. So they have a choice here, and together, they also have access to the union and credit and savings schemes. And because they spend a lot of time together and they have a collective response to violence, their external perception changes. They're more confident over time. And this kind of leads to resilience and kind of experience power weight because they're aware of their rights and dignity, and sometimes they kind of experience empowerment. This is what I observed while doing this study. And how do you actually measure empowerment is very difficult to say. But then, the women, they make a conscious decision here to join the entertainment industry. They begin to earn an income. An income kind of gives them an autonomy and voice because they have control over the money and they are in a position to take independent decisions. So definitely there's a use of choice here. And then there's also an existence of choice. Peer networks exist. If they wish, if they desire, they can come in contact with them. While the violence remains constant, peer networks, provide different kinds of supports, and they also have inner strength because these women are brilliant fighters. And this kind of leads to an achievement of choice. In most of the cases, they want to have a good future for their children. Hope for a better life. So one of the immediate benefits that emerge from earning an income is that women feel largely confident, whilst the education and well-being of their children remain their main priority. The sense of empowerment can be seen as what Kabir describes as a shift of consciousness, where the women have not been able to take control of their lives, but they're able to overturn the dominant masculine and patriarchal norms that has kept them or other women in a situation of subordination for a very, very long time. So that kind of changes when they start when they start working in a very cosmopolitan environment, like in the capital of Nepal. Do these resilience models, can it be applied to in other sectors? So in India recently, I was traveling and I was researching or doing a story of women farmers, and I had traveled to one of the largest states in India with a population of 200 million, Uttar Pradesh. And in India, 79% of the women in rural workforce, especially women are engaged in agriculture activities, And according to the latest economic survey of India, women constitute more than 55% of the farming sector's main workers, which is defined as anyone who spends 6 months or more in a year making money through agricultural activities. Yet they only hold 12.8% of the agriculture assets. Here is an account of one of the farmers here that you have just seen, and she says that our day begins at the day at dawn. And after completing all household work and sending children to school, we have to go to field and cultivate our land. In the afternoon, we return home to attend our livestock. Soon after, we go back to the field where we work until sunset. This is the kind of work they have to do in the fields while the husbands are away working in cities. The farms where the women work in Uttar Pradesh or most of India are very small, but they're essential to the survival of their families who rely on the income earned by selling vegetables. So they have a number of mouths to feed, and they also have to pay for their children's education and for unforeseen expenses. But in India, the problem is that the labor, these women are not recognized as workers, and because of which do not have access to a lot of schemes, the government benefits and schemes, because they're simply not recognized as workers. So in one of the villages, I came across a union, run by this woman here, Saraswati Devi, a firebrand woman, and she has been kind of leading protest movements, and she has been able to mobilize women, and she says that, that if the government does not come to us, we shall come to the government. So you can see again in the collective, when women start speaking collectively, the administration of the government is sometimes forced to listen. And post-pandemic, there's been a lot of focus on agriculture, going back to the basics, all other sectors may have failed, but especially in India, the agriculture sector has actually done well. And a recent study has found that, if farmers, especially women farmers, if they belong to cooperative self-help groups and other organizations, that can help them connect to the market, and the life is a bit better in that way. Here, in terms of recommendations, how do you get women out and get them work in industries, in factories, in jobs which are traditionally not known to be employing women? Some of the big challenges, you could have n number of policies in the subcontinent context, India, Nepal, and other countries. Social norms are very difficult to change, and that's not going to, behavior change is not going to come through. Like if you set up a factory somewhere, it's very difficult for women to actually travel to that place. And some of the factories, like for example, steel or any other factory, it's kind of perceived that women are not supposed to be doing those kind of jobs. Security, toilets, men backlash are all big, big problems. but recently I came across a good example. It is a success story of NGOs, corporations, and the government coming together to smash gender biases and help them join, becoming a part of the workforce. There's a project called Disha Project, which is run by the Indian Development Foundation and UNDP and supported by the IKEA Foundation. And they work with companies to address potential issues like structural changes, both at policy and infrastructure levels. Stringent security system in place, so that women are not harassed, and health and safety measures, and appointing women welfare officers. These are some of the practical things that needs to be done, separate toilets, creche facility, dining and recreational areas, which are all very expensive and not many factories or companies are going to do unless they're incentivized by the government. But the factory that I visited, it was observed that over time, men behaved more soberly in the presence of women colleagues. And this is how it all changed, like in one of the very remote areas where I had been, women are being taught how to drive scooters, so they can go to work to the factories. It's happening actually. So one of the big challenges about not being able to move, mobilization and going to a place, mobility factor, which was not there now because they have a scooter and they're being trained, they're suddenly empowered and they go into the factories. And you can see it is a live example. And there's a girl, a graduate here who is now working as a supervisor, but when she wanted to join this factory, there was a bit of a backlash. Her parents did not want her to join. But there are still problems. Women cannot do night shifts, and because if they're employed in big numbers in societies and the social norms of the patriarchy is very strong, there's often a backlash of various kinds, and because of which the companies are frightened. To be honest, they're really frightened to employ women because of political backlash too. So in terms of general recommendations, in how you help women to build resilience, protect their jobs, capacity building of women leaders, which I have not really mentioned yet. I've used a framework called positive deviance. Positive deviance are normally women or men who kind of behave differently from their peers and they fight the odds. For example, all the women I've interviewed, the women who have set up NGOs, they were all a part of the industry, but now they work as social workers helping other women. Recognizing women as works. For example, last week I spoke to someone called Ninja Bhatnagar who has worked a lot with women farmers. In India, the labor of women is not recognized, women farmers in particular. So it's important that they are recognized and given the status of worker. Some good news is that, following the pandemic, the National Human Rights Commission has issued an advisory recognizing sex workers and informal workers. That's in India, to make them eligible for beneficiary schemes. Most women, in Nepal in particular, they do not have citizenship. They're kind of stateless people because of their circumstances. And it has been an uphill task to get their citizenship recognized. The rights of domestic workers, and domestic workers are employed by people who are actually well off, who are educated, middle class of people. But the pandemic has shown otherwise. Millions of them have actually lost their jobs. Their families have not been paying their salaries. Supporting women collectives still remains the key. From the example that I have just cited, women, when they speak collectively, they're in a far more better position to bargain and claim their rights. Political will, which is always lacking. Tackling customary laws, making national laws are never ever going to help, because women in tribal societies and in communities, their lives are not governed by national policies, constitution, any other laws. It's always the customary laws. For example, there are far more single women in India than separated women, because men can simply dump the women whenever they like, and it's only the village councils, the panchayats, which are called in India, they take the decisions, and they're always in the favor of men. And finally, making men the part of change. One reason why the campaigns or gender rights, for example, is kind of not, it's not up to the mark. It's because men are not part of the campaigns of change. Like, for example, when you talk about human trafficking, you have to make men part of the solution as well. It cannot be led only by women. It's not really a solution. So these are some of the general recommendations which I have for you on this talk. You might, if you want to read a bit more about what I have just mentioned, last year, the paper was published along with my PhD supervisor, Dr. Tamsin Bradley. tales of suffering and women's experiences of working in Nepal's informal. So it's available online. And as Laila mentioned in the beginning of the talk, the book is coming up next year. So with that, I'd just like to conclude this talk. Thank you very much for this, for giving me the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Suti. That was really very, very interesting, fascinating, and also obviously extremely important. What is really important in your presentation is to show in particular that all the stories of these women, they relate and they can be exportable, so to speak. They're not only purely Nepalese or Indian. The patterns of violence, but also the patterns of resilience that you have identified, we have identified elsewhere. I'm thinking about, you know, extremely dramatic situation of genocide, of civil wars in Rwanda, in former Yugoslavia, and today in a number of conflicts areas. So this is one of the reasons your work is extremely important, because your conclusion can be applied to a number of other territories, really. I like very much your conclusion when you say that you have to engage with men, because the change is not going to come without men. So that's also something extremely important. We've received a number of questions from the audience, and I'm sure we're going to receive a few more. So I'm going to hold my own question for later. The first question from Terence. As a VSO worker, I know we are active in Nepal. Can they help with your mission?
Sorry, Laila, repeat the question, please. It's not very clear.
No issue. As a VSO worker, I know we are active in India, in Nepal, I'm sorry. Can they help with your mission?
Can you...
Terence, if you're here, maybe you want to take the floor to elaborate upon your question, because I guess that you want to ask a question about, you know, evangelism work. All right?
Hello.
Hello, thanks, Terence. Would you like to elaborate further on your question?
Yes, I work with VSO in various different countries, and I know that we're very active in Nepal. We have a very active office there, which has been looking very, very seriously at women's issues. And I wondered whether there was any chance of linking up with the research that's being done, using that to help both of us.
Well, I'll be really, really happy if that can be done, actually. You know, it's a lot of opportunities. And, you know, as I was telling during the course of my talk, you know, I have worked with 4 different organizations in Nepal. They're part of this study. And they would benefit from such collaborations, you know, and expertise that you might bring in, you know, because this group of women that I have just mentioned is what's one of the sex and entertainment industry in Nepal is one of the largest, one of the fastest growing because of number of reasons, and poverty or lack of employment. And what we are expected to see after pandemic, it's a bit scary to say the least, you know, because I've gone back to this group, and many of them, to be honest, literally starving. And because they're not recognized as citizens, they have not been able to access or benefit from any kind of relief or the what the government has announced following the pandemic. So yeah, I'd be very happy to kind of connect with you and maybe take it forward. If that answers the question, really, yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So Terence, we will make sure to connect you to Suti, so you can write to me or to Suti directly, but feel free to write to me. I'm easy to find, and I'll connect you to Suti. And indeed, Suti, you're working with a large number of international organizations, including the UN, as you mentioned, because this work is very collaborative in any case. Thank you so much. We'll have another question from Lauren. What are the shortcomings of the laws related to prostitution in India?
Laila, I'm afraid you'll have to repeat that again. Your voice is not very clear.
All right. What are the shortcomings of the laws related to prostitution in India?
Well, in India, prostitution is kind of not legal, you know, and but it's not really well defined. It's everywhere, but like Nepal, like what I'm just like Nepal, you know, the women who work directly in brothels, and they face a lot of harassment from police. And though there is an underground, or there's a kind of a parallelly, there's a is emergence of a kind of a entertainment industry in the form of spa, massage parlors, which kind of employs a lot of women, and there's a lot of exploitation. There is no, at the moment, there is no kind of a law to regulate them, or to kind of address the exploitation, because it's kind of not recognized, or people are quite after, people do not talk about it in general. But as far prostitution is concerned, in India, it's not legal, and they are fighting for their right, in the sense that just last week, the National Human Rights Commission has passed an advisory to recognize them as women at work. But then there's another lobby that kind of fights for human trafficking, and they are not very happy with this advisory.
Indeed, Suti, and that's a global debate, really, because it's a discussion which happens in a number of countries. We have a question from Palabi, which relates, actually. What do you think about the decision taken by National Human Rights Commission in India about identifying sex work as informal work?
I think it's a very good decision, because we have had a lot of laws, and quite stringent laws, around human trafficking, because the biggest opposition or resistance comes from the lobby that works in the human trafficking area. But I have been reporting on human trafficking for over a decade now, and there's a very little correlation between the sex industry and human trafficking. And most women in India are not really directly employed in what we see in a red light area or brothel or something like that. The sex industry and the entertainment sector, it's really growing, mushrooming in bigger cities, and there is no laws or provisions to protect these women who are actually exploited. They are not victims of human trafficking. In India, trafficking happens for a number of other reasons, mainly for marriages, or because of domestic work. A lot of agencies that have come up in bigger cities, and they traffic women as slaves, and they kind of work as maids in homes of middle-class people. But there's also trafficking for marriages, because of the skewed sex in some northern Indian states. But there is no direct correlation. Obviously, some women are trafficked and pushed into this industry. But then the sex industry in India is very, very old, and despite all the regulations and laws, it's not become small. It's in fact growing. And in bigger cities like Mumbai and Delhi, thousands and thousands of women are employed. It's a question of their livelihood. Idea would be to make their job safer, and I think I kind of wholeheartedly support the advisory that's passed by the National Human Rights Commission.
Thank you very much, Suti. I have a question for you, which relates to some extent to the legal environment, and the environment not only which the women are working, but also on the basis of which they might be judged or not. The panchayat system. Could you elaborate further on that? Because obviously, there's a very large literature which has been published on panchayat system, whether it's good or not. I'm myself extremely puzzled about the panchayat, but this is not necessarily a notion that everybody knows about. So could you kindly explain about what you were talking?
Well, the panchayat is the local village level council in the first kind of, in Indian democratic system. The panchayats, the local councils at the village level, they have a lot of, it's the first kind of step towards democracy. And the Indian law, so I think it kind of states that I think around 33% of the seats has to go to women, which is a very positive step in that direction. But I have been to a number of villages. Just last week, I was running a hand washing campaign in Maharashtra, in Western Indian states, and I visited a couple of villages, and I could see women on, women leaders, or women quite actively coming and participating. But in many places, though, women have had powers in the sense that they are councillors, but it's their husbands who call the shots. They do not necessarily speak, it's purely for political reasons, or they tend to, put their wives in that position because the husbands are powerful. But the panchayat is the first level of governance in India, and they have considerable power, and all the government benefits and schemes, especially related to water, sanitation, hygiene, menstrual hygiene, and it has to be, they get a lot of budget is allocated to them, and it is within their powers to actually, if they really want, they can implement those projects on the ground. So as the structure itself, it's a good system of governance, a good system of strengthening the democracy. But then, there are problems like corruption and political issues, and sometimes not right people being in that position, which is often the case. Yeah.
Yes. And I suppose that there are problems as well in terms of the customary law on which the decisions are based, because often this customary law is not particularly pro-woman and rather quite oppressive. So I suppose that it's about finding a fine balance between the national legislation and more customary law.
Yeah, there is not, from my experience, what I've seen, there is no provision or there is no mechanism to educate the local leaders about the laws or the policies, or how they can actually improve the lives of people and what it means to have those policies and laws in place. The local council leaders or the panchayat leaders, they love their own laws, the customary laws. They like to be regulated because they have a say. It's a patriarchal order, which they're never going to get away. For example, 2 years back in India, there was there's a lot of talk about triple talaq. It's about how a Muslim man can divorce his women by uttering the words talaq 3 times, and the government wanted to have law around that to protect Muslim women. But when I was doing this story, I realized that in India, the number of separated women are far more than divorced women, because for example, in bigger states like Rajasthan and Gujarat and some tribal fronts, a man can simply abandon his wife, and the panchayat, the local council, always takes the side of men, which is all right for them. So again, it's a manifestation of patriarchy more than anything else. And the judiciary or the constitutional provisions which are available do not really interfere, or this type of things are never reported. Women are in the receiving end, and most of these women are again single mothers, and they're often left to fend for themselves. This is one of the reasons why this sector, the sex and industry sector, is always going to grow unless you protect and unless you provide. It's a question of the survival, because you have to realize that these women are not educated and do not have skills. Where would they go? So this is one option that's easily available. And in the context of Nepal, of course, the situation is a bit different. It's similar, but then because the economic prospect in that country is not really good, so because of tourism and other factors, entertainment sector is always going to mushroom. It's going to prosper.
Indeed, and there is maybe a very last question, because I'm conscious of time, but it's really interesting. You addressed briefly the idea of citizenship, and you said that in Nepal in particular, I'm sure in certain parts of India, but it's clearer in Nepal, some of these women are non-existent. They have no existence, no legal existence as a citizen. How come is that?
Well, Nepal government is trying to address this issue. There are a lot of groups, for example, the NGOs that I have mentioned in the talk, they've been campaigning actively to get their citizens, for the women to get the citizenship. This is because most of the women, were married when they're very young, and they're not educated, and they're kind of abandoned by the husbands, which means they do not have any papers with them. And in many cases, for example, because of this 10 years conflict, many women, they could never return home, and they do not have identity. And the Nepalese government has been very reluctant to recognize these women. The citizenship laws in Nepal is pretty stringent. It's very difficult to prove. But I think over the last few years, there has been a lot of activism in a positive direction. And even in India, for example, I think if you want a passport and if you're a single mother, you really do not need the name of the male or a father. But these things are progressive. Nepal's constitution, I think that the new constitution itself is very, very progressive when it comes to achieving gender equality in many, many fronts. But the problem is that it needs to be implemented on the ground. Far more people needs to be educated, and there has to be a more stronger movement or activism in that regard. And that's why it's very essential to strengthen the women's collectives. One of the problems with the women's collective, the NGOs, which are run by women, these are very strong women. They're brilliant in articulation, but they themselves are not educated. They can do certain things, but beyond that, they cannot. And then they're influenced by political parties, and these women go on to political parties, and the entire kind of project fails thereon. And this is the trend. So it's important to build the capacities of the local organizations more than anything else. They need to know about their rights and type of things that you are mentioning. And that does not happen.
Mm-hmm. Indeed, Suti, and I think that's going to be the conclusion, the education of rights, so two rights, and the need for, well, all the international and national actors to act together towards that, because we're not necessarily lacking legislation. In a number of these countries, the constitution is already a good tool, and we do have appropriate legislation, but as you said, its implementation is always extremely difficult. Suti, thank you so much, because once again, that was fascinating and equally important. Your work is based on years of research, blending journalism with academic work. It's in this regard extremely unique and important. You mentioned one of your publications, and one more time, I'd like to mention that you have your book, which is coming up with Routledge in a few months. So we'll make sure we refer to that for everyone, sorry, on the website as well. Thank you so much, Suti, and I'd like to thank as well my team, in particular today, Jason, Olga, Claudia, and Gloria. I'll see you next week for another webinar. Thank you very much for being such a great audience as well.
Thank you very much, and thank you everyone for coming to this presentation this evening.
Thank you, Suti. All right. Bye-bye, everyone. Great. So I think, Jason, you can